welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Keating. In this podcast, we talk about it all, our parenting, our partnering, and our professional lives, because they are all a part of us, and we were never meant to do this alone. Hello, podcast listeners. Welcome back to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm really excited to introduce you today to Emily Cherkin. And the reason I'm really excited about this one is Emily focuses on screens and parenting. Her entire focus is on how we can utilize technology for all the good that it offers, but not let it sort of destroy the connection and the relationships that we have with our children, and how we can protect them from the downfalls of screen technology, which is a topic that I hear so many parents talk about, ask about, think about. So Emily is a nationally recognized consultant who takes a tech intentional approach to addressing screen time challenges. She's a former middle school teacher, which I just think gives her some pretty great street cred. And she's been featured for her work on screen time in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Today Show, Good Morning America, Australia's Weekend Today, and numerous other places. And I will also note that she was one of my experts in the Safe Parenting Summit that I hosted back in February of this year, 2023. She recently testified before the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine about children and technology and sort of where we're headed and what we need to be thinking about. Emily offers private one-on-one consulting, parent courses, professional development training, and personalized school presentations based on that tech intentional approach that I mentioned. She's the parent of an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old. And as that, she really understands the real life challenges of parenting in the digital age. She is also the co-founder of the Student Data Privacy Project, which is an advocacy group fighting to protect student data in schools. This will be a nice kind of follow-up to some of the conversations that you've heard recently from Dr. Mandy Sanchez at Culture Reframed, from Don Weibel at Talk More, Tech Less. This is all part of the same conversation. In this conversation with Emily, we dig into the difference between scary and dangerous. We talk about at what age kids should get a phone, or what questions should we think about before we do that. We talk about a little bit about parental controls and monitoring. And we talk about, some of the anxiety and challenges that we're seeing come up for kids and teens right now that are caused, at least in part, by screens. I think you'll enjoy this one. Fair warning, there is one or two swear words that are used in this one. So if you've got little kids in the room, just be aware before you dive in. But this is an important conversation, and I think you're going to like it. Emily has a lot of wisdom, a lot of great perspective, and has done the research. She knows her stuff. So enjoy. Emily, welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm really excited to have you here. And as you and I were just talking offline before we started recording, we have so much alignment on so many things, and we could go in 1,000 different directions with this conversation. So I'm really excited to see where this goes. So buckle up, listeners. I want to start with talking about something that you and I did an interview about for the Safe Parenting Summit, which aired back in February of this year. And that is the difference between scary and dangerous. And it ended up, obviously it was the theme of your presentation, your interview with me for the summit, but it really ended up being a kind of a theme throughout the whole summit as we talked about safety, but like, how do we not feel afraid all the time? And what do we need to worry about? And what do we not need to worry about? So let's start there.
Yeah.
I know you talk a lot about this, about the difference between those two things. Let's dig in that space.
Okay. That sounds good. Well, let me start too by saying that as a parent, I have not been without my own anxiety and fear about raising kids in the world today. So like, I want to normalize that like fear and anxiety in parenting is very real. What I have learned, and this has taken me many, many, many years and good therapy and good friends and good mentors, is that I can put my attention and focus into things that I can't control, and that doesn't make me feel better or more capable. In fact, has the opposite effect. And so one of the things that I see as both a parent, a former educator, and now as a Screentime Consultant is how much fear and anxiety there is in parenting as it dovetails with screen time. And it's lots of things. It's fear about what their content is, like what kids are seeing or doing online. It's fear about how much they're doing it. It's a fear about safety in the real world, like needing that contact and communication. And it's fear of like missing out, right? The FOMO that parents don't want their children to experience. And
Yes.
the thing I always try to remind parents is that there can be multiple things that are true at the same time. Like we can have these anxieties about the world and our children can still feel left out. And technology isn't always going to save us. And that it isn't, the word I've been using a lot right now is just nuance. It is all about nuance, because even identical twins that are biologically the same family are going to experience things very differently about technology, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's as an example, right?
About the whole world. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, right? And that's true within families. So people will say, oh, well, my oldest, we did this, and it totally didn't work with my youngest. But that's absolutely normal. And it makes it even harder, which is why there isn't a one size fits all to screen time.
Totally. And, I see that in all aspects of parenting where parents are like, well, this worked for my first kid. What has gone off the rails with my second one or my third one or my fifth one? Because they are so different. And I think when it comes to tech, unlike some other areas of parenting, it is changing on a near daily. It is changing on a daily basis, right?
Right.
And I am not as immersed in the tech side of things, although I do some work in it. But like 2 years ago, for example, would I ever have thought that Chat GPT would be here and that, my kid could theoretically, she has not done this to the best of my knowledge, but could theoretically like write a paper using AI. We're all trying to catch up on it like minute by minute basis and feeling like we're perpetually behind.
Well, there's a great line that getting information from the internet is like trying to take a drink of water from a fire hose.
Yes.
And I think that feels very much like parenting in the digital age too. I had a parent once say, it feels like I'm holding back a tsunami with sandbags, like it's like, it doesn't even matter what I do. And I'm an optimist. And I definitely say to parents, like, yes, it still matters. Yes, this is a fight worth having. Yes, there are things you can do. No, there are not quick fixes. No, it's not going to be easy. No, you're not exempt from looking at your own screen use, right? Like, so it's, I think there's that piece of it. And I also want to just like, when we talk about, I say screen time, but the problem is that means so many different things. Like recording a podcast interview over Zoom is one form of screen time.
Sure.
Meanwhile, I could be scrolling through Twitter or Instagram, or, somebody could be calling me, or I could be writing an essay, or I could be watching a movie, right? So one of the problems is that screen time is this, like, people get real up in arms about, well, you're saying it's all bad. Well, no, this is again why I go back to nuance, right? It's all about what depends is really the answer. And so I say too, to parents, we've got this perfect storm. We have personal devices for children starting at younger and younger ages, right? That's just, the graph is just climbing on that. We have screens for school. And I think a lot of times that gets left out of this conversation because parents feel so much like, oh my gosh, how am I going to handle this at home? But meanwhile, kids are now coming home with devices for school from the school, or are being required to log into platforms to do school. That's a huge problem. And as a teacher, I saw the beginning of that. And then we have the isolation of the pandemic and the, everybody sort of threw their hands up, said we have to use these devices to stay in touch with friends and family and teachers, right, in this short term. And I always use the line that like, it was the lifeboat we needed in that first spring of 2020, but lifeboats aren't long-term housing. It's like, now what? Now we're still living in the lifeboat, but That's not a very
let's not navigate the
sustainable-
ocean in a lifeboat.
Exactly. All kinds of water metaphors today, I'm realizing. Fire hose and tsunami and lifeboats. I don't know, maybe because it's raining. But I do think there is something here about like parents. We've got to get out of the lifeboats. We can move to a bigger ship. We can, like it's time. But it's also so hard. And so I think I hear a lot from parents like, I thought I had a handle on it and then COVID hit. Or I have a good rule at home or a good system at home, but the school is sending home all this stuff and I feel like I can't fight against it. Or my daughter's the only one without social media and all her friends have it and she's left out, right? So it's so multifaceted. That's what makes it so hard.
Like as a parent, I feel all of those things, right? I feel all of them because I've got, as I think you know, and the listeners probably have heard me say, I have a 13-and-a-half-year-old and I have a 6-year-old. Obviously, the screen usage for both of them is quite different because they're in really different developmental places. But here's what I will also say. It's very different for my 6-year-old than it was for my older daughter when she was 6.
Yes.
And part of that is the pandemic. And part of that is, she's in kindergarten and has a computer at school. They don't use it, all day. She doesn't bring it home, but she's already doing learning on the computer and she's in a dual language program. So there's some things that computer can offer, but I'll be honest, it makes me crazy.
So again, like even the activism that I do, which is around school screen use and data and privacy, we were having this fight pre-pandemic. So I don't want to say that like the pandemic caused all of the screens and school use. It just accelerated what was already happening. And, I think you're right. Like to compare your two kids at different age 6s is really illuminating. I had a parent call me once and she said, I have 8 children.
Oh boy.
And she said, I am having such a hard time with number 8, who is 15 now. And she said, I have never experienced the parenting challenges I am experiencing now with my 15-year-old because of tech. And, look, again, I know I just said temperament and all of that, and every kid's different, but like, to me, that was a very fascinating anecdote, right? Like that it is a different world. Even if you have 2 kids within, 7 years, I always say this is not even a 10-year problem. This is a 5-year challenge. And we can maybe even say it's a 3-year acceleration because of COVID, right?
Yes.
And so that's why none of those old things work. That's why what we had control of pre-pandemic is just not happening now for a variety of reasons.
I like thinking about it that way in the sense that like this woman who had, 8 children, youngest is 15. So you got to imagine at a minimum, her older one is 23, right? And that's if she has one baby every year.
One baby after
years.
Another. Right.
Probably the older one is even older than that. And they're spread out a little bit more. But that's one parent. Because a lot of times what, we hear is like my parents saying, it seems like it's a lot harder, or we're saying to them, what we're doing right now is a lot harder to parent than when you were parenting. And, the older generation had their own challenges. I don't want to diminish that, but it's harder for them to maybe wrap their head around that. But when you have the same parent in a 8-year span, 15-year span, whatever, saying, no, this is harder. Right. And I'm saying the same things. Like it is hard. It's harder with my younger one than it was for my older one. And now that she's hit 13 and, we did the whole approach to cell phones that is promoted and it's called wait till 8th. We did wait till 8.
Yeah. And so did I.
And oh my God, we're drinking from a fire hose, right? We're still drinking from the fire hose. You and I work in this space and we work with parents and we read the statistics and the articles and the studies and all of those things. And so when I'm in my rational brain, I can calm myself down and say, okay, right. I can get into that optimistic space. I can rely on the parenting tools that I have, but I'm not always in my rational brain. And a lot of the parents that I'm sure you see and that I see are definitely not always in our rational brain. And so we're getting really confused to kind of circle it back about that difference between what is scary.
Yes.
And what is dangerous, specifically when it comes to screen usage. Because if you ask me, and I love the internet, I use the internet all day. We're having this conversation over the internet. And yet I still would say, really, my default position is it's all scary. Right.
Well, and that just also to tie back to the nuance piece, right? Like, I think to think about those differences in kids, just generation, even in the last 10 years, how much has changed, it's nuance again, right? Because I mean, I'm 45. We had computers in the classroom when I was in elementary school. But here's the big difference. They didn't have algorithms the way that they do today. They weren't connected to the internet where you could access literally anything, anytime, anywhere. And that is one of the ways in which it's so different. And so I think I always want to make sure too that I'm clear that I'm not anti-technology, right? Like I think—
And I'm not either.
Yeah. And there is, I always say tech intentional, right? Like just to your point about, language learning, like maybe for foreign language as a tool for certain activities in that kindergarten class, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So let's go back to scary versus dangerous. Because one of the things, and I'll just give some hypotheticals because of what I hear a lot, like, and I mentioned this earlier, like number one thing I hear all the time is my kid feels like they're the only one without, fill it in, Minecraft, social media, a phone. They are very concerned about their child feeling left out. And I want to just back it up a minute because I taught middle school for 12 years. And some of that happened pre-smartphone and even pre-cell phone. And I will say that being left out in middle school, actually at any age, but especially in middle school, is normal. It sucks. It doesn't feel good, but it's not a unique situation to this generation.
True.
So yeah, I think it's very important for parents to know this is not new. And that what I say is you are concerned about the fear of missing out because they don't have this tool to communicate on. And I understand that. It is a very different way that kids are communicating, and it can make it harder for those who don't have it. But I always say, just consider how much more FOMO they're going to feel once they have it. Because now they're going to see all the things they were left out of, all the parties they weren't invited to, all the chat things that went on that they weren't included in. And so you parents may still decide to give it, but don't be fooled into thinking that you're actually decreasing FOMO. You're doing the opposite, right?
Yes. And that is such an important point because when I ask parents, like, why did you get your child a cell phone or a smartphone, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's generally two categories of answers that I get. And the first is for safety reasons, right? So that I can get in touch with them, so that I know where they are, so that they can call me if something's wrong. And then the second big reason is kind of a keeping up with the Joneses, for lack of a right. Yeah. Everybody's doing it. My neighbor gave their kid a cell phone. All of her classmates have cell phones. He doesn't want to feel left out. And so I gave him a cell phone.
Yep.
And those are really, I've never once heard a parent say, well, my kid's really into molecular biology and would like to have access to research.
No, 100%. No, I'm 100% with you on those are the two reasons. And the second one you list is just the FOMO one. It's like everybody else is doing it. I don't want them to be left out.
Yeah.
But in both those circumstances, I'm going to ask a tricky question. For whom are we getting the device then?
Yes.
It's not for the child. It is for us as our parent, our anxiety and our fear about the world. And again, I'm not judging you. Like I always say, I replace judgment with curiosity. Why is it that you feel that it is so necessary? And before you make that choice, is it possible to think about what skills are being displaced by offering it too soon, sooner than others, whatever, you want to say? And what are the possible skills might be gained by not providing it? So as an example, and I hear this a lot about I need to reach my child, right? Which is first of all about a parent's need, not about a child's need. Schools have front offices still with phones, landlines.
Yeah.
And actually it's incredibly disruptive to classrooms. I'm a teacher. I know what this is like to have kids' phones ringing in the middle of class or buzzing or vibrating or going off. In fact, my daughter's K-5 school sent an email home at the beginning of this year, K-5, that said, please remember to have your kids leave their smartwatches and smartphones in their backpack with the sound off during the day because they're disrupting class. So parents don't necessarily always think that through. Now, I also always hear, well, my kid needs it because X. There's this feeling that our situation is special and unique. There are a few exceptions to this, and one of them, for example, would be as a medical device. A no-brainer. A kid has diabetes. Totally. That's their glucose monitor. No problem. That is not what I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm talking about the fact that my kid walks home alone and I'm scared about them walking home alone and I want them to be able to reach me. That is a want, not a need. And that is a parent want, not a child. Well, I mean, I'm sure the kid isn't sad to have it, but here's the other problem that we have to think about when we're talking about scary and dangerous. It is a scary feeling to get lost. It's a scary feeling for a parent to think about a child getting lost. But how are you making sure that your kid doesn't get lost outside of providing them with an internet connected device in which they can get lost in the cyber world where creepy people work and live, right?
Well, totally. I always say to parents, the internet is a place. It's not a thing.
Right.
It is a location where they go. And so if you would not set your child loose, I mean, I say this sort of tongue in cheek, but not really. Like if you would not set your child loose in a mall full of strip clubs and
bars,
porn shops,
right,
then why would you set them loose on this device?
Yeah.
But it's also, there's, even if they're not going to those things on the internet, there are places where predators do lurk.
Yes. And we as parents, this is the problem. It's about risk assessment, right? We're overestimating the risk of kids walking home from school alone or even with friends. And we're underestimating the risk of them being online with strangers in this place called the internet. The problem is because we as parents are on our devices all the time. And the way in which these companies and news platforms and social media apps make money is by keeping us engaged longer. And in order to keep us engaged longer, they have to give us content we want to read. Well, what content do we want to listen or watch? Maybe we don't even want to, but it's the clickbait stuff. We're rubbernecking the car accident on the freeway. It's the horrible story about the one kid who got kidnapped because some TikTok creep, reached out and he got picked up. And I'm going to add one more thing here that I think is really not talked about a lot is how much parent shaming goes into this when those things happen. So we all feel very self-righteous when somebody else's kid has something bad happens to them. We say, because my kid has a phone, they will never, XYZ, or because I did. And it makes us feel better about it. And I know we're all lovely people and we want what's best for our kids, right? We're not necessarily walking around with our noses in the air, but it justifies our anxiety, even though our anxiety is disproportionate to the risk.
Yes. Yes. I mean, we just live in an anxious world in general.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so many, and you and I were talking about this as well offline about sort of the reasons for that increase in anxiety, because the CDC research that came out in February is abundantly clear. And I did a podcast episode on this, that anxiety rates are escalating rapidly. The research that the CDC recently released is related to kids that are roughly ages 14 to 18. But let's be honest, our anxiety is going right up along with them.
Yes.
And so it is so hard to it's not hard, it's easy to get lost in that mix of scary and dangerous because we do hear something. And it's so funny you say, like, it makes us feel better to judge others. When I was working as a prosecutor and doing like sex offense cases, right, which are not, they're not for the faint of heart. It was more than once, either in one of my cases or one of my colleagues' cases, where I'd have a jury that would acquit the defendant because they would victim blame because it made them feel safer, right? So to say, well, I would never wear what that victim wore, right? And so therefore, I'm not susceptible to that risk. That risk won't happen to me. And so it was easier in some cases to do that than to say, no, actually, this guy over here is the one responsible here.
Right.
And that's that's just an analogy that popped into my mind about what you're describing here. When we as parents are judging other parents for something happening, we do it because it is easier to blame that parent and to find some way to distinguish ourselves from that parent.
Yep.
Than it is to recognize the bigger context of what's going on.
That's a powerful example. And, to go back to the thing I just was talking about, the TikTok kidnapping, right? Again, we're talking like super, super, super rare. It's not that predators online are necessarily rare. I call it digital whack-a-mole. They're popping up everywhere. But being kidnapped, physically kidnapped is. And I saw some post about it on social media, and it was from an organization I find reputable, but there was a bit of fear mongering going on in that. And I really struggle with that because I think it's good for parents to be informed, but I don't think fear mongering makes us make better choices. And what was shocking to me was in the comment thread, how many parents were saying, well, why didn't that parent take away the kid's phone? I mean, comment after comment after comment. And then if you actually read the article, it was the third phone. Like mom had confiscated the phone twice and the kid had gone out and got a burner phone. So here's the reality. These things happen. We cannot inoculate and protect our children from anything bad ever happening. Do we want bad things to happen to them? Of course not. But we're not keeping them safe when we literally think they're safer by being on the internet all day, first of all, nor does it actually make us safer, even though what your point is absolutely right. Like the psychological part of that is we feel better about our choices because, oh gosh, well, she was wearing that, or that parent didn't take away the phone. And so then we can feel better about our choices. But this is where I push back hard on parents and say, if you want things to be different, you're going to have to step into that discomfort of accepting that we are not perfect. We are going to screw up. Our kids are going to have hard experiences. And actually, that's what's going to keep them safe. This is the paradox. The more we try to protect them from the real world, the less safe they are.
Okay. I just want to say, I want you to say that again. That again.
The more we try to protect them from the real world, the less safe they actually are. Yes. Because they need these skills. They need skills so again, go back to the walking home from school alone. First of all, by the way, in many other cultures, and even in America, a generation or two ago, it was the norm for kids to walk to and from school alone, right? That was expected. It was not only tolerated, it was, you would be weird if you didn't. That is flipped, right? Now we're in this world of we have to opt in, and then we're the whoa, you're an extreme parent, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we decide that our 8-year-old safer walking home from school if we give him a smartwatch or a smartphone, what are we not thinking about? So, okay, maybe he has a map or he can call us if he gets lost. But now he has a device on which he's going to be very distracted. Even the dumbed down ones are really distracting. They're buttons to push. I mean, literally that's what kids do, right?
Yep.
And especially young children. Plus, he's not safer if he's looking down at something when he's walking through traffic, right? This is an example where we have to teach basic safety. We don't give our kids bicycles and not put helmets on them. There are all these things that we do. We want them to learn to ride a bike and we want them to not have head injuries. So we give them a helmet, but we don't tell them not to ride the bike. Right. And so we have to approach that again with this. Maybe you need to get him a phone someday. Again, fine. Does he know how to walk home alone by himself without a phone first? Right. And if he gets lost, what would he do? Those are the skills that have to be in place first. Those are the skills that will keep kids safe, right?
Yeah. Yep. I think there's a lot of different reasons behind why we are not as invested in teaching kids skills. Sometimes we've gotten into this kind of bizarre era in parenting where we do a lot for them that they are capable of doing for themselves and do not encourage that skill building. And this is one more area of it.
Yeah.
And so actually this is a nice sort of place to turn I don't know if it's turning the conversation, but another direction that I want to head in, which is this idea of when we reach the point where there is a legitimately good reason or age, that they're quote unquote age appropriate, if any of us are age appropriate for smartphones, to give them a phone. Mm-hmm. What are the skills that we need to teach them? Mm-hmm. What are the conversations that we need to have? Mm-hmm. And when we get into the weeds about what should happen when a kid gets a cell phone, you and I have a few points of disagreement, but they're minor, right? They're pretty minor.
Right. Yeah.
Overall, you and I are totally aligned on what needs to be happening and what the end goal is. So why don't you start with that? What's the end goal? We're going to give a kid a phone. What should we be thinking about? And what are some of the things we need to do to get there?
Yes. And again, I'm going to bring up that word nuance because again, I mean, parents will say, well, how much time is too much? What age should I get a kid a phone? It depends. It depends on so many things. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the first thing I would say is it has to be a choice that you're making, not because of your parental need or anxiety, but because it's the right time and your child has demonstrated certain things. Some of those things would be things like, independence, right? Like, are they capable of walking from A to B? Are they capable of asking for help and talking to strangers? And, this is that hard thing where we talk about stranger danger, but actually we want our kids to know how to ask for help from people. And when we do the stranger danger thing, that's not necessarily teaching them the skills, right?
Well, and in my child sexual abuse prevention classes I teach, I'm like, if I could invite you to get rid of one phrase, it would be stranger danger. Why?
Awesome.
Because 90+% of abuse does not happen at the hands of a stranger. It is somebody
Amen.
Right?
Right.
That phrase is that was originally developed by NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they now regret the introduction of that phrase.
Oh, wow.
Because it has put blinders on many of our eyes to what the real risks are. And also, kids don't think of strangers in the same way that we do.
Exactly. And also, again, when we talk about what fears, like, we want our kids to worry about the right things or to be fearful of the thing. We want them to trust other people. I mean, again, from a big meta perspective, in terms of the fabric of our society, we need each other. And if we teach each other not to trust one another and not disputing, like teaching safe and avoiding sex abuse, like no question.
Right.
But that doesn't start by fearing anyone who's not somebody because that doesn't inoculate you anyway.
100%. In every talk I give, I'm like, look, your kid needs to be able to ask a stranger for help. Yeah. Now, they might need some skills as to how to evaluate who's the best person to ask for help.
I always say ask a parent with kids, or ask somebody who's with another person, right? Like, I'm with you 100% on that. And I think, again, that goes into our parent fear about the world. Most people aren't terrible. And it feels that way because of our 24/7 news consumption and social media feed. Right. And so that is our job to pull out from that and try to remember, no, more people are wanting to be helpful than are harmful. And that's a really thing. We need to say that so that our kids start to believe it too. Right.
Yes.
And the skills that go into being safe, right? That is absolutely important. So how to ask for help, who to ask for help, the words to say, and also things like, we talk about, like, you mentioned kids are reluctant to do things and not, we do a lot of stuff for our kids. Chores. I know that sounds old school. Kids, are you making their lunch for them? Are you putting their stuff away? Are they doing their own laundry? Like, basic life skills. It's not because we're mean parents. It's because when they go to college or jobs after, high school, whatever it is they're doing, they have to be able to take care of themselves. I mean, there's some real, like, I'm sure Julie, what is it? Lycott Haynes, How to Raise an Adult.
Haynes. Oh, yes. I love Julie. I've chatted with her. She is one of my parenting heroes.
Yes. So that's the end product, right? We're talking about when people are sent into the world and like parents are showing up to do their laundry on the weekends at college. Like, no. And I just read this yesterday that today's 18-year-olds are less mature than 14-year-olds 30 years ago. And I say that with a little bit of compassion because I would argue that the pandemic just sort of -3 years of development for all of us, right? So to cut ourselves some slack here, if you have a 12-year-old, they're probably behaving like a 9-year-old, right? Developmentally, that's okay. They're going to be okay, but I do think we need to give a little leeway for that. I think there's a lot of hope. I really believe that young people are the future. It's cliche as that sounds, but we have to set them up with the tools. This is to go back to what we were just talking about, what do kids need when they're ready to have that phone? Again, I always just say, like, certainly delay as long as you absolutely can, whether that's access to it as an iPad when they're little or social media when they're in middle school or a phone or whatever, just even a month, even just every day is a benefit. And I always say this, no parent has ever said to me, I wish I'd given them a phone younger or social media earlier.
Yeah. They've never said that.
It's
to me
always the
either.
Opposite. Yeah. And so again, and I use this metaphor or analogy of the avocado, the ripening avocado that, like, you get it and it's like not ripe. Oh crap.
Yes.
Right. And I feel like a lot of parents think they kind of, especially those 10 and unders, like parents of those younger kids, like pre-middle school. They're like, I got a handle on my avocado, like they're doing great. Like we limit screen time, we protect them, we know what we're doing, we know what they're watching. Boom. Everybody's got a phone. Everybody wants social media. So it's like, I'm not saying it's too late, but it is the like, oh, this is a different reality, and I think it's really hard until you're in it to see how hard it is when you hit that transition point of, the uptick statistically in who has a phone, but the developmental shift that's happening around 10 and 11 that, and puberty and adolescence and hormones and like, oh boy, is it a storm.
It is a storm. It is. Yeah. And I feel like I've spent the last few years in the middle of it. And my daughter didn't have a smartphone until 8th grade, as I said. I know a lot about like the conversations that I need to have, and we have them, and it is still really hard.
It's still hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to the point about wait till 8, I think what I would say, what I like about that is it's encouraging parents to see you're not alone in waiting. Right. And I mean, it used to be kind of like wait till 8. Oh, that's not such a big deal. Now it's a much harder thing to do because, it's something like 20% of 8-year-olds have iPhones now. Right. Like it's a very different world, but it's not like wait till 8 means don't talk about technology until 8th grade. Like there is so much foundational stuff. I mean, like I was saying, those skills before screens that have to happen before it's, because then you're going to just have a whole different problem. If it's wait till 8th, birthday, 8th grade, here's your iPhone, have fun, be safe. Oh, you're definitely going to have issues, right? Like,
yeah.
So, and this is where you and I have bounced around a little bit, but like, I definitely feel like there are some alternatives, right? And one thing that I'm doing with my daughter's turning 12 in 15 days, and she would very much like her own phone. And it is I have 2 kids, completely different experiences in terms of what they want. And right now we're sharing my phone. And of course she'll say, no, we're not sharing it. You let me use it. Well, okay, technically that's true because I paid for it. But what it is allowed is teaching in the moment. And this is the hands-on stuff that parents, I think, too often want to outsource to parental controls and apps. And I always say, look, if you have them and they work, great. In my mind, they end up generating a lot more work for parents, and they don't exempt us from that mentoring part.
Yeah.
So it's allowed us some pretty amazing opportunities to sit and be side by side and say like, whoa, okay, you're having a little drama with a friend. Maybe texting isn't the right, like, let's navigate this. What do you want her to say? What do you want to say? What is it your goal here? And letting her come to those conclusions herself. Like, maybe I should just call her. Oh, I could have told her it's better to call than to text, but letting her come to that herself is to me the beginning of practicing these skills that I'm going to want her to have for when she has it herself.
Totally. Yeah. And to your point, like, absolutely, you have to start these conversations even before they get their phone. And I, as you know, because this is a place where we have talked about this, I am a big fan of parental controls and monitoring and using the tech that's available just because of the prevalence of pornography. And I mean, however, I always say to parents, that does not mean you don't have to talk. It doesn't mean you don't do spot checks of your kid's phone, which, and that might change as they get older. Like I may not be doing the same. I anticipate I will not be doing the same types of spot checks for my 18-year-old that I'm doing for my 13-year-old, right? Because the need for privacy increases and there's a whole number of reasons for that. But so we use both, right? So we have tons of conversations.
Yeah.
It's those conversations that I think are so key. We also, I use my phone for my business. And so during the pandemic, I couldn't share it with her.
Sure.
So we used a dumb phone.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. She had a Gab wireless phone that allowed her to talk and text, but had zero internet connectivity. And that was for us. And again, every family has to figure out what works for them. But for us, that was a really nice intermediary. To kind of start those conversations in a baby steps kind of way. And even now that she has a cell phone, she does not have social media.
Right. And I mean, again, I'm actually agreeing with everything you're saying. I think, again, it goes back to nuance. Like, your kid, your parenting style, you're very well informed about this. You're not relying on parental controls to keep you informed. I think the problem is too often parents think that parental controls will keep their kids from getting into content that they don't, and to some degree, yeah, it does, but it doesn't monitor in-app content, right? That's always a shock to parents. Is like, wait, what? No. And that's not because you have bad parental controls. It's because those platforms don't allow monitoring of in-app content.
Yeah.
It's designed to make it hard. And so that to me is like, there's that missing piece. If you're going to monitor, fine. But like, boy, you need to be talking about what's happening within the app. You need to be talking about what do you do when you see X, Y, and Z, and the way I mean, again, and I may have mentioned this at the Safe Parent Summit, but like make an account as the age of your child for whatever platform they're asking you to use. If they want Snapchat, great. You make an account as a whatever year old to do Snapchat for a week and see what content gets pushed to you. And then if you're okay with it, fine. But I'm going to guess you're not.
Yeah, it is. It's really shocking what gets pushed to our kids. Yeah.
And we want them to come to us. I mean, that's the other thing is why to back this all up, go back to birth. It all comes back to the relationship we have with our kids and trust. And, I just say to my kids, it's not that I don't trust you. It's that I don't trust all these people on the internet. I don't know. Yeah. You can tell me that you're not doing X, Y, and Z, but that doesn't mean other people aren't reaching out. It doesn't mean my kids' friends aren't showing them stuff. So I'm not going into this naively, but like the most important thing to me is that I correct myself, when they see something that makes them uncomfortable, they tell me. Because I say to parents, it's either you or it's Google. What do you want? Yes. Do you want them to come to you or do you want them to go Google it? And,
totally.
You meaning it could be a trusted adult, doesn't have to be a parent, but like a teacher, a mentor, somebody.
Totally.
And that is a conversation that we can have well before our kids have devices or access to stuff.
Oh my gosh. That, I mean, obviously, given where this conversation is sort of, wandered, we could go on for hours and probably will again at some point. But I think that's such a great note to end on, this idea that it's really based on relationship
100%.
And trust. Like those are the two things that will keep our kids safer than anything.
Yes, I agree. And to the trust, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's another point about the, letting kids walk around in the neighborhood. When we can say to our kids, I trust your ability to find your way home from a place that they can. Boy, what does that do for their self-confidence?
Totally.
That is the thing that will keep them safe, whether it's online or in the real world, because they know I can handle this. And when I can't handle it, I know I can ask my parent or adult for help.
Yeah.
That's what we want at the end of the day. Whether you give them a phone at 8 or 16, that's what you want first.
Absolutely. Emily, where can people find you? Because I know people are going to want more. You've got such great information. And by the way, you've also got a book coming out in January 2024.
Yes.
But in the meantime, where can people find you?
Well, ironically, on the internet. So my website is thescreentimeconsultant.com. I post on social media too. So I'm on the major platforms. Of course, I have an assistant to help me do this because I don't want to spend a lot of time on social media. And then I actually recommend my mailing list is a really good place to be because I send weekly essays out that are a lot more in depth related to parenting and screen time than the stuff I post. So that's a great place to start. I do have some essays on my blog as well that, like making a fake Snapchat account as pretending to be 15. And boy, was that illuminating. So yeah, that would be lovely. And yes, my book is called The Screentime Solution, a judgment-free guide to becoming a tech intentional family. And that'll be out in January.
I can't wait. I get to read it before everybody else. And I'm pretty excited about that.
Thank you.
Awesome. We will make sure that people have all of those links in the show notes. Emily, thank you. Thank you for being here and just kind of wandering our way through this really fascinating world that we are all living in right now.
Absolutely. And I think this is how we navigate it, is not by going to people who agree with us, but like talking with each other and finding out we have a lot more in common than in difference. And I think that's so important for our kids to see too. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Heartful Parent Podcast. I hope you got a lot out of that conversation with Emily Cherkin and sort of that, we really just dug into the conversation and let the conversation go where it took us. I hope it was valuable to you. If you enjoyed that and if you've been getting something good out of the Heartful Parent Podcast, please do me the favor and the honor of dropping a 5-star review, sharing a few thoughts about why you think it's awesome and why other parents should tune in. I want to get the word out there. so grateful to you. Best of luck in your week of parenting. Hang in there, hang tight, find joy. I'll see you next week.